Welcome back to Manufacturing Talk Radio. We're here in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the WiM Summit, Women in Manufacturing. We've been having a great day talking today to a lot of great people, a lot of great women, smart, educated, and willing to work and willing to promote women in manufacturing. And with me, I have Ann Pacelli. And Mary is with the United States Department of Commerce, Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and her title is Manager, Workforce Development and Program Development Office. Do I have to read the other side also? No, okay. It's long. Mary, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, tell us about NIST and what your particular function is at NIST.
Well, the Hollings MEP program, Manufacturing Extension Partnership, is about 28 years old, and we are part of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. The program was started 28 years ago very specifically to focus on small, mid-sized manufacturing companies. And as an extension program, I work in the federal office, but we fund affiliated centers in every state and Puerto Rico. They are all a little bit different. Some are housed in community colleges, some are hosted by universities, some are hosted by state economic development groups, and some are actually their own independent 501(c)(3)s, nonprofits. They all receive a set amount of funding from the program, which they must match with revenues from their clients, maybe state revenues, other foundations, other work that they do. But their focus is to work predominantly with the small, mid-sized manufacturing companies. The original thought back 28 years ago was the concept of technology transfer. A lot of technology going on in the federal labs, the federal systems, NIST, and other Department of Energy labs. And small manufacturers looking at not sure how to adopt that. Big companies have a little bit more resources to approach that. So our small companies, really 28 years ago, we're still kind of worried about getting into the 20th and 21st century of work. But over the years, our centers have grown and solidified, and we work as a large network across the country, sharing information and working with companies to help them grow so that they stay in the communities that they're in, perhaps grow to other communities, obviously add people. And at the federal level, the home office, we support the centers with program development, connections to other federal systems, connections to other grants, other organizations that are supportive of manufacturing. So my background is workforce development. I spent 16 years with one of our MEP centers in Cleveland, Ohio, Magnet, and was doing workforce development for our clients, along with helping connect our clients to the schools and the educational system. And so now at the federal level, I am working to help other centers adopt and continue to grow their workforce systems.
So just to clarify for our listeners, workforce development, define that for us.
It's a big word.
It certainly is.
We look at it, it's kind of two parts. One part is working with the companies and their workforce, their organizational structure. Do they have the right people? How do they find the right people? How do they train the people once they get in, whether it's frontline technicians, middle skill technicians, or their professional development people? How do they find and develop their engineering and research and development staff? The other side of workforce is, of course, the not yet employed in the right job workforce, whether it's our youth who are looking for new careers, the kind of recently graduated youth and young adults who haven't quite found themselves yet, people who are maybe disconnected from other jobs and are looking for work. And so on that side, we are looking to let people know how wonderful jobs in manufacturing are and connect them with the right training so they can get into those jobs.
So the number that's being bandied around, that by the year 2020, we're going to have a 3.4 million workforce gap in manufacturing.
It could be that big, yes.
I think now it's around 1 million or 1.5 million.
Yeah, I've heard everywhere from 700 to 1 million. Depends on what they're counting as the jobs.
Right. In any event, once it gets into those
it's a big
number, it's a big number.
And our clients are not sleeping at night.
I'm sure not. We've heard lots of stories, some very creative stories about some manufacturers as to what they're doing to fill the gaps that they are experiencing. But I'm curious in greater detail about what NIST is doing, very specifically about training programs.
Well,
Excuse me.
again,
I'm a manufacturer.
Good.
I need 10 employees. I've got 9 of them are retirees. They're leaving within 6 months. How do I get that information transferred to new employees? And if that new employee will come to work, and all those
all those other
issues.
fun things, yes. Well, we can't solve all of the problems of the world. I've always said if I could solve the getting to work on time, drug-free, I'd be writing a book and probably living on a beach somewhere, but haven't done that yet. But there are ways to overcome that a little bit, and some of it is, of course, finding the right employee. And some of the work that our MEP centers do is first working with the manufacturing company to really help them define what are the skills they need and how are they going to train people when they get them. The reality is, in some locations, there's not a lot of students coming out of the career and technical schools. So you can't just say, I want somebody with a CNC machining certificate. They may not exist. Now, on the other hand, we have to start working with getting more people into those programs. But in the short term, if we help the company take a look at what are the skills that they could live with, and then how do they better train somebody in an structured on-the-job program. Smaller companies don't have the internal resources to do that all the time. So if you utilize an external resource like an MEP, they can help you maybe craft some of that OJT better so that you can define who is the right person I can bring in, maybe through some assessments, and then bring them in and run them through a structured training program so that you can start growing your own.
Do you aid in creating
Yes.
structured programs?
Yes, many of our centers can do that, and they do that for their manufacturing companies as part of their growth services.
For the sake of our listeners, are there fees that MEP charges for this?
Yes, in most cases there are fees. Our centers are affiliated centers, and as I said in the beginning, they receive some funding from the federal government, but they do need to match that. So their fees may be slightly reduced depending on the MEP that you're working with, and many times they can help find some other funding locally, whether it's a local grant or the workforce system. We use the word workforce in many ways, but
Right.
in our states, the WiM system, the Workforce Innovation Boards, have funding to help support small companies. So sometimes our MEPs can help the companies connect with that funding also that will help offset some of the costs. Other creative things that are happening, I'm not sure if you've talked with Manufacturing Institute,
Yes.
Jen Worth, okay, or Jen McNally. They have crafted a program outline that many of our centers are starting to help implement with colleges and CTEs called Right Skills Now. And that's for helping bring like companies together. A small company like yourself may only need 1 or 2 machinists or 1 or 2 people with certain skills. But the MEP Center, since they look at all the manufacturers in their state,
Right.
they can look at the area and say, what other small companies need a couple? Bring them together, bring the appropriate school together, go into the workforce system and find people and put them through some intense training so that you can then hire somebody with some higher skills and has some of the training that you would have maybe had to do internally, but can be paid
Yes.
for with the workforce system.
Not to be repetitive, because I think I've told this story a couple of times today in other interviews. A company up in New Hampshire, Hypertherm, who is about a 700-person employer, they were needing people, and their community is a small work pool. And what they did was they reached out to other manufacturers, as you said, and they put together, I don't know how many companies there were, let's say a half a dozen or a dozen, that what skills do we all collectively
Yes.
need? And they wound up all paying for these students to be trained, or people who needed to be retrained,
Right.
and they all contributed to it without the aid of the government. It's all
Good for them.
good, all done by them. And then they have this ongoing program.
Yeah.
And they also have an employment pool that they can now
Yes.
draw from. They're up in New Hampshire, and the gentleman who was on our show it's in one of our podcasts if you're interested to
Yeah.
look into that further. A very interesting and very unique approach.
And we're finding across the country that in some areas, manufacturers are stepping up to the plate and doing that. The MEP centers can help with coordinating, helping you find other companies. But we believe that a lot of this needs to be industry-led. And right now, in the short term, our workforce system and our schools are still struggling with what is the right skills, learning how to communicate with manufacturing. Manufacturing jobs look a little different and sometimes are dissimilar than the whole bulk of customer service and healthcare jobs that your workforce system tends to deal with. So it's more difficult for our workforce employees in the one-stops and the career centers to really understand the needs of manufacturers. So we like to step in and help with that and be the intermediary. And the needs for growing your own within the manufacturing pool is going to continue to be something that manufacturers are going to have to adopt, because as we move
Sure.
into higher automation, we're going to have to take the workforce we have and move them with us.
So let's switch topics for a moment, and let's talk about women in manufacturing. And do you have separate programs or separate opportunities within NIST and MEP?
No, we don't necessarily specifically have separate programs, although when we do programming, when some of our centers are doing some of that workforce pipeline, some examples are working with some community colleges across the country where maybe they do to encourage young students, and we'll do a student and engineering day or a couple of days. They might do one specifically for young girls, and then bring in young women who are already in the manufacturing workforce, whether they're welders or engineers, accountants, salespeople, research people, and have them chat with those young
Right.
ladies. And also try to connect those two back to the schools and ask them to go back and continue to mentor. So we do try to pay attention to the diversity of the workforce and making sure that we're reaching out to the population that may not be knocking at the door of these manufacturers, but if they knew a little bit more about it, would.
I think that education at the human level is really what it's going to take, because manufacturing has a bad name.
Absolutely. It's too bad.
Women don't get the support that they
Right.
need to get
They don't.
into it. And Henry Stinton, the Secretary of War in 1940s, said we need 5 million new workers, and 250 million of them, 2.5 million of them have to be women. And that was the first time women really got into the workforce.
That is. And back then, the federal government actually had created some materials to help the companies,
Yep.
training within industry.
Yep.
And I read the history of that and have read the materials, and it's really well done work.
Yep.
But when you think about why they did it, and the unfortunate part was we put it on the shelf.
And we're in the same place.
And now we're back in the same place. And women are over 50% of the workforce pool in the population, and maybe represent about 18-19% of the manufacturing workforce, and that's everything from frontline to engineering.
Right.
We have to move more women into everything. Our young women today should, as we're talking to young people, whether they're men or young boys or young girls, we look at the career pathways. How do you start in your career and technical center at high school? And you can see the path, because we have to talk to the parents of, you can move from your high school into a 2-year college degree. Many companies are now hiring people out of that, giving them tuition reimbursement, and you can go back and get your engineering degree later.
I think you said a very key point when you mentioned parents. Parents is a big problem.
It is.
They're the ones who are guiding their kids into 4-year degrees, become a doctor, become a lawyer, become whatever, earn 6-figure compensation packages.
Yeah.
And they are hurting themselves, their kids, and the country with that attitude.
Well, it happened to me. My dad told me not to be an engineer because he worked as an engineer in a manufacturing facility, and said, no, you should go into business or medicine or something like that. And yet I ended up in training and education for manufacturing, and I love it. Every day is just a wonderful day.
He didn't tell you to become a secretary.
No, no, my mother would never have let him tell him. She was told to do that, and she went on to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Told her dad, forget it.
Right.
But no, I'm not quite that old, but I'm out there. But we do have to still think about that, and the vision and the visuals that our young people see on television and in the media. You talk to young people, and they want to wear cool clothes to go to work.
Right.
Well, if you're going into a steel mill,
Yep.
you know, your green jacket and your hard hat doesn't always look all that cool.
Right.
But the work is cool. And you can make enough money to go out and buy all the cool clothes you want for going out on Friday night.
Absolutely. I was, about 5-6 years ago, I had stopped off at Timken Steel.
Oh, yes.
And I went into the plant, and I had been there, I don't know, 20, 30 years before that. And there was a lot of people.
Beautiful facility.
Yeah, there's no people there.
I know.
It's this one particular plant was 1 mile long. They made steel pipe, and every 100 feet or so was a person watching the monitors.
Right.
And it was just an amazing sight to see that.
Yes. And that person needs more training and more abilities than the people who worked there 20 years
Absolutely,
ago.
absolutely.
And the other more important person, especially in a steel plant, is the maintenance technician. And that's where that middle skill job is. That's where your big skill gap is right now.
Right.
It's a 2-year degree minimum, and a lot of experience has to go with it. And those are very critical people in most of our factories today.
Yeah, yeah. So you're here today, tomorrow, and are you a speaker here?
Yes, I'm going to be on a panel tomorrow. I was asked to talk on a panel about women, the skills gap issue, and what are we doing, what's happening. One of my partners on the panel with me is a woman who's been also in the workforce development arena in different agencies, Department of Commerce and others. And she is now working in one of these manufacturing innovation institutes, some of the new manufacturing innovation institutes that are coming online.
Right.
She's at the one in Chicago for digital manufacturing, and we're working together on developing their workforce program. So we have a lot of reach. I work with Department of Labor very closely in Washington, D.C. to really identify some new funding. How do we make sure that different labor funding comes out and gets tagged to manufacturing? And kudos to labor. They do, when they release certain kinds of competitive funding, do put the caveat in, not just to work with manufacturing MEP centers when you're doing manufacturing training, but they also look for whoever is doing the funded work to focus on the diversity of the workforce, women, people of color, dislocated workers. So the Department of Labor is really working hard to move into that realm. Yeah.
So we always state that we never ask gotcha questions. So we're not going to ask a gotcha question. However, I am going to ask an important question, and I haven't asked this question of anybody today. I was saving it for you.
Oh, good.
Are we going to solve this problem? And if so, how long is it going to take?
Hopefully, we'd like to see it solved next year, but I'm guessing we're going to see the needle start moving in about 5 years.
Yeah.
We're starting to see it a little bit. And in a lot of, earlier this week, we had one of our national quarterly meetings with all of the MEP centers from around the country. And some of our talk was on what's happening with Manufacturing Day next week. And many states now have moved into Manufacturing Week, Manufacturing Month.
Yeah, right.
It's really taken off.
Oh, that's great.
And there's a lot of good grassroots efforts. And one of the things that we've talked about early this year was starting to measure how, and it's difficult because most Manufacturing Day events are getting students and parents and teachers to go visit a plant and talk and maybe have some pizza. But we are starting to measure some things. You know, what did you know about manufacturing? So some of the centers who have done some of these focused one day for women or young children learn more about manufacturing careers. They're doing a pre-post survey. Did you know anything about manufacturing before you got here?
Right.
What did you learn when you left? Do you think you're more interested? And they're starting to see some positive gains. Now, we can't track these students.
Right.
They're students. So but we are in a few areas have seen an uptick in enrollment in the career and technical system in the high school level, and the community colleges, specifically in the manufacturing technology.
I think that where you're going to see the changes, where it's going to be most felt, and that's going to be at the manufacturing level.
Yes.
If the manufacturer, all of a sudden he's got good workers and he doesn't have retirement issues and so on and so forth, that's where you're going to see where it had an effect.
And for us at MEP, we see that a lot of your workforce growth overall is going to be in our small, mid-sized companies. And I think that's part of where a lot of people don't see that either. One of the reasons for us bringing Manufacturing Day up is because our client base was saying, well, Alcoa, Parker, Lincoln, everybody knows those names, so people will gravitate to their job ads first. So if you go into a job fair, those are the long lines. Your machine shop, Joe's machine shop down the street, nobody knows what they do, and so nobody's at their table. You have to go out and you have to market yourself. So many of the activities that we're seeing in Manufacturing Day are our small, mid-sized companies who are saying, hey, we got cool jobs. And I worked with a lot of college interns at the community college and university level. We did some projects to link college interns into the small manufacturing companies. And students who were a little hesitant, well, it's not Lincoln, but Lincoln Electric or Parker Hannifin or Alcoa, but they come out at the end of the summer saying, wow, that was cool. Yeah. And I really like working for a small company. Yeah.
The cool and sexy is where it's at for the young kids.
Well, they get to do more.
Sure.
It's a little unstructured, but you end up getting to do more and find out how to do more of how things are made. And I think that's what's
turning a screw on a Ford bumper.
Well, they don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I know they have.
I've been there. but at the community college and college level, the interns have really, and then they go back and they talk to their peers. Right. And so again, manufacturing, the needle needs to move, and our small companies are the ones that really have to see it the most. Yeah.
Mary, thank you very much for sitting in with us and giving us all this information. Appreciate it, and talk to your friends about us.
I will.
And that would be great.
I will make sure that all of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Centers know about you and
I appreciate
give
that.
you some help.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So that's it, folks. Manufacturing Talk Radio is done for today. We are at mfgtalkradio.com. The podcasts for our shows will be up later today or tomorrow. And we are at WiM, Women in Manufacturing. And I bid you a good day.